Somewhere beneath a jungle riverbank on the island of Guam, a man lay curled in a hole barely wider than his own shoulders for 27 years. He wasn't a prisoner. Nobody had locked him in there. He dug that hole himself, and he believed, with his whole heart, that the war still raged on. His name was Shoichi Yokoi, and what kept him buried wasn't the enemy. It was a single word drilled into him back home: never surrender. Yokoi had been a tailor's apprentice before the army called him up. By 1943, he was a sergeant in the Imperial Japanese Army, headed for the Pacific. By 1944, he was stationed on Guam, a speck of coral in jungle America desperately wanted back, guarded by thousands of Japanese troops who believed it would hold forever. In July 1944, tens of thousands of American soldiers stormed the beaches. Within weeks, the island's Japanese garrison of over 18,000 men was shattered. Most surrendered or died fighting. Yokoi and a handful of others chose a third path instead: vanish into the mountains and simply never come out. They told themselves it was only temporary. Wait for reinforcements. Wait for the tide of war to turn. None of them imagined it might just end without them. For years, Yokoi moved with small bands of stragglers, hiding by day and foraging by night, always listening for American patrols crashing through the undergrowth. One by one, the others died, surrendered, or disappeared. By the late 1950s, Yokoi was almost completely alone in the dripping green dark of the jungle he barely recognized anymore. He dug himself a cave near the Talofofo River, barely 4 feet high and walled with bamboo, hidden so well that locals walked past it for years. Inside that hole, he built an entire hidden life. He wove cloth from hibiscus bark and stitched his own uniforms together by hand. He carved fish hooks from bamboo splinters, wove eel traps from vines, and twisted rope so fine it looked almost machine-spun. His diet was whatever the jungle allowed: field rats, frogs, snails, river shrimp, wild mangoes, papayas, and the starchy pith of cycad palms. He tracked time by the moon, cutting careful notches in a wood with every cycle, refusing to let the days slip past unnoticed. But the strangest part of his story isn't how he survived the jungle. It's what he did again and again whenever paper fell from the sky above him. American planes dropped leaflets over Guam for years, announcing over and over that Japan had surrendered, that the war had ended back in 1945. Yokoi read every single one, and every time he decided they were lies, clever propaganda meant to lure starving soldiers out of hiding to be shot. In his mind, surrender simply wasn't an option. Imperial Japan's military code treated it as a disgrace far worse than death itself. He'd grown up on stories of soldiers who died rather than face capture. Walking out of that jungle empty-handed felt, to him, like pure betrayal. So the seasons kept turning above his hidden bamboo roof. Presidents changed. Men walked on the moon. Yokoi noticed none of it. 20 years passed. Then 25. He was no longer a young sergeant, just a gray, weathered man surviving on instinct in total isolation. Then, on a January afternoon in 1972, 2 local hunters wading along the Talofofo River spotted movement in the reeds that didn't belong to any animal. It was Yokoi, thin and startled, still clutching a homemade net. Before either man could speak, he lunged, certain these strangers had come to kill him. The hunters wrestled him down, more shocked than he was. For a moment, 3 men grappled in the mud over a war none of them had chosen. When soldiers finally confirmed his identity, the truth landed on Yokoi like a collapsing roof. The war he'd guarded so faithfully had ended in 1945. 27 years, nearly 10,000 days of hiding and hunger and fear spent defending a nation that had already rebuilt itself into a peaceful country. He wasn't even the last. A few stragglers on other islands held out even longer, but almost none endured such total, self-imposed solitude. When Yokoi finally boarded a plane home to Japan, he braced for shame, maybe even punishment for abandoning his post all those decades ago. Instead, crowds packed the airport. Reporters shouted his name. Japan, still wrestling with its wartime past, had already turned him into a legend. Stepping off that plane onto the tarmac, Yokoi bowed low and quietly said the words that would follow him for the rest of his life. "It is with much embarrassment," he told the cameras, "but I have returned. Not pride, not relief, just a soldier's quiet shame at simply being alive." He'd missed his mother's death, missed the life of the woman who once loved him, missed an entire generation of a Japan rebuilt from ashes. Television flickered in colors he'd never seen. Cars filled streets he remembered as dirt paths. Guam itself, once a battlefield, was covered in resort hotels. Reporters kept asking what he thought of modern Japan. Yokoi, still half-rooted in 1944, could barely process a world that had moved on without him. He married within the year, settled into a quiet life, and began teaching survival skills, the same tricks that had kept him alive underground for decades. He also became an unlikely voice warning against blind obedience, telling audiences that unquestioning loyalty had cost him nearly 30 years of his own life. Some in Japan saw him as a symbol of unbreakable devotion. Others saw a warning about what happens when a lie outlives the truth behind it. Yokoi himself seemed to carry both feelings at once. Proud he never broke his oath, haunted by everything that oath had quietly stolen from him. He passed away in 1997 in a hospital bed instead of a jungle cave, having lived just long enough to see the century nearly end. The original hole where Yokoi hid for decades eventually collapsed, swallowed back into the same jungle that had once concealed it so completely. Today, a replica cave stands near the Talofofo River, part of a small tourist park where visitors ride cable cars and snap photos without a second thought. It's easy, from a safe distance, to call his story impossible. But real isolation, real fear, and real hunger have broken far stronger men, far faster. What kept Yokoi going wasn't superhuman strength. It was belief, a belief so absolute it needed no evidence at all to keep on burning. And that's the detail that lingers longest afterward. Not the hiding itself, but how long a mind can keep fighting a war that's already over. Because plenty of us carry our own quiet, hidden wars too, old grudges, old fears, arguments we never let end long after the reason faded. Somewhere along that same jungle river, roots and silt have slowly folded back over the ground where his real hiding place once stood. His name became shorthand for a very human question, one that outlives any war. How do you know it's finally safe to stop fighting? Somewhere, a jungle still grows quietly over an empty stretch of earth, the last hiding place of a war that ended long before he'd let it go. If stories of soldiers who refused to give up pull you in the way this one did, subscribe. The next impossible chapter of military history is waiting.